All right, so to get us started this morning, what I want to do is I also want to touch base on just a few items, and I'm going to share the screen with you with some slides. We're going to hit just a few slides real quick, only because there's some things I want to just touch base on, right? Avoiding common contract mistakes. That's what we're working on today. It's a 2-hour CE class. You need 3 hours of contracts on your second renewal and on. 3 hours of contracts. This is 2 hours. We've already done one 2-hour session. We have another one scheduled, I think, in September, October, something like that. All right, added items that we brought in for this one. If you're a new licensee within your first 2 years, starting October the 1st, if your license is going to renew after October the 1st, you're going to need a 30-hour brokerage course. If your license is renewing for the first time after October the 1st, you're going to need a 30-hour brokerage course. All right, please pass that word around. Make sure that we have everybody covered. And for those of you that are in that situation, the GRI class, GRI brokerage counts for that if you take the GRI brokerage course. All right. And any questions there? If it is, as I'm going through this, if you guys have any questions, please jump in and yell at me. Seller's disclosure notice. The seller's disclosure notice is changing as of 1 September. And it's already in zip form. It's already on Texas Realtors website. And what I highlighted on here, any contract that's executed, so when we put an effective date on the contract, after September the 1st, you're supposed to have the new seller's disclosure notice. So if you have a listing right now, today, use the new seller's disclosure notice would be the easiest thing. And it's already in the system. So if you pull it from a template, if it's a template you have established, it should upload from there. If it's a template you've already used, in other words, I built a file for an investor, or I built it for a seller a month ago because they were thinking about selling, that form may not be in there. So you need to check it. It will automatically load into your templates that have not been used. It'll automatically do that for you. And it is there. I've checked it. I've been working on it for a couple weeks now.
Mac, the both of them are going to change, or only the long one? Because some of your agents of other real estate companies send the short one, and that's what
Right.
can do about that.
Well, there is something we can do about it. We can let them know that it's the wrong one, and that's why I put this screenshot up here. This is from Trex website. So yes, what you're calling the short one, that's Trex version. The long one is Texas Realtors. And both of them are changing, have changed. All right. And the old version will not be available after September the 1st. Yes, it is fillable in zip form. Alex, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but we can talk about that. It is fillable. You can send it out for electronic signatures and all that other good stuff. It works. I worked with an agent yesterday from Corpus. And actually, I sent out her forms for her to try to help her get those done. She was on the road. Sent them out for electronic signatures. There's so many ways to do this. All we need to do is work on it, right? Just don't give up on it. I also wanted to throw in here. So please remember, if you, just like Gustavo was talking about, if you get an old seller's disclosure, let the other agent know that it's out of date and it should be updated. And if they say no, they're not going to, that's what this clip is here for. You can screenshot that and send that to the knucklehead, because I know some of them will be like that. Well, my broker told me not to mess with it, or I hear that all the time. Well, my broker said, well, tell your broker to take a class. I don't know. Anyway, so we have that. We're good there. We're not going to spend any more time on it. Forms. The forms that are supposed to be maintained by the broker, there's 4 years. We're supposed to keep those. One of the easiest things in my mind to do is just to upload everything you have pertaining to that transaction in zip form. If you do the review as you go along, it makes it a little faster to go through it. We have some people that are really, really great at that. Every time they throw an amendment in the file, they submit it for review. I mean, it's just, they don't wait till the end and you have 40 forms to take a look at. Makes it so much easier to work with. In addition to that, when you close the file out, anything extra you have, communication, text, email, any of that stuff, PDF version, anything that pertains to the transaction, you can make create those in a PDF and upload it in that file as well, so that we have it. All right, let's take a look at just a couple, a few slides here, 4 or 5 of them, of last week's highlights, if you will. It's like Sunday nights. What is that? Funny videos? Yeah, no, not funny. All right. On here where it has days, and we'll talk about this one again probably later on, but right here where it has days, we need days in here. There should be days in here. I don't know why you would not have days in there at all. If you know, share it with me, because everything I've been taught, everything I've worked with says we should have days in there. Even if this is in A, we still need days, because what if there's a problem with the title commitment? And it tells you right here, commitment, exception documents, and survey. What if there's a problem with it? The buyer has no out. And by the way, there's a really good class you can take through Texas Realtors. It's seller beware, buyers, what is it, 42 ways or 43 ways of getting out of the contract. And that's certainly one of them. Any questions on that one? And again, these are just from last week, last Wednesday or Thursday or something like that. Here's one. We are so confused. We don't even know what we're doing. It's awesome. Love and life. Is it required or not required? I don't know. Yes. Okay. It's okay. It's not, but attention to detail is so important. These are legal binding contracts. Legal binding contracts. So important. And this here, termite treatment if wood destroying insects are found. Hello. Now we used to do that. And that this agent is a used to be type of agent. In other words, she's been in the business a long time. But that's why I'm so glad to see some of you here, because we need to spread that word and make sure that we're staying up to date with what's going on. This is a business, and it's your business. It's your license. It's what you do. It's also the license of the brokerage or the broker. We need to make sure we're doing things the right way. And this specifically even says, do not insert subject to inspection. And in my world, if means subject to, I don't know. You guys. And right here, we've talked about this. Yes.
Oh, going back to the WDI, so can we put instead, seller will provide a clear WDI inspection report?
Do you know you need it?
No.
So why would you put it in there?
Just to protect the buyer in the event.
A precaution.
Right. So
There goes whatever you see or your customer sees needs to be fixed, like broken window, like, I don't know, specific things prior to the inspections. That's what I always put on that line. And then we make inspections and they will come in the inspections.
right. So one of the when I say we used to do this, we did. I mean, we were taught this right back in the day. And when it was pointed out that it says subject to, don't do it anymore. What we did was we shifted our business to do the pest inspection, because if there's any kind of financing, it's probably going to be required or should probably be the best move. And sometimes you get those done for free, although be careful with that aspect of it. But we shifted those over to the option period. So we get somebody with pest control to come out and do an inspection during the option period. During the option period, you're going to negotiate what needs to be fixed, if there is anything, and that's a part of it. And if there's pest control, I mean, if there's wood destroying insects and they're going to be fixed, then you'll get that clear certification on it. If it's required for the loan, then that should be a part of it as well. But when you put, and the only reason I'm just trying to look at it outside the box, if you will. If I put on there seller to provide a clear wood destroying insect certification, I don't know that there's absolutely something wrong with that, but I would take it as you're assuming they have termites. And if I go into a house and there's holes all over the wall, house I sold on Lazy Lake over here, there must have been 1,000 holes on the wall that faced Lazy Lake. I'm not, it was termites. But when I looked at it, I can't make that call. I'm not going to make that call, but I am going to ask that we get a wood destroying insect report. And I've mentioned that before. The same thing walking around the outside. I always look at the foundation, and if I see the little mud runs going up, I'm going to tell the buyer that we need to get this, and we'll work from there. Does that make sense? And if we do the inspection and it needs repairs, we do that during the option period, just like any other repairs. Right. All right. So on this one, once again, buyer's attorney or seller's attorney, that's if they have it today, right? We're writing up the offer. We're doing it. We're going to do it today. What do we have? And if they don't have an attorney that's going to be reviewing it today, that's okay. That's not a problem. I don't need to put anything in there. Other than maybe NA. If a week from now, the buyer says, hey, Mac, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and send this over to my attorney and let them take a look at it. What do I need to do? You guys tell me.
Amendment?
Yes, absolutely. Do an amendment and add an attorney to paragraph 23. That's all you need to do. So easy to work with. So easy to work with. All right. So we don't need that in there. And there's I know there's a company in McAllen that every contract they send out has that in there. And I believe I saved the post, but there was a Facebook post where I said, why would anybody do this? And one of their agents put on there, so that I know that I've talked to them about it. Well, what about all the other blanks in the contract? What do you put in those to know that you talked to them about it? I mean, come on. We don't want to do that. All right. Everybody good? Third-party financing. And again, I'm not an attorney, but just based on their input from them, if the box isn't marked, it doesn't apply. You can fill out whatever you want to, but if you don't mark the box, it doesn't apply. So what type of financing are we doing? We're doing conventional, but we don't know whether it's going to be a first or a second. And is that minor? Yeah, maybe so. But if you talk to some of these attorneys, all they're looking for is a hole to blow it up and say, you didn't know what you're doing. And you just gave them proof of that. Makes sense? But at least they filled in all the blanks. So there is a positive there. All the blanks.
So as a listing agent, if I receive this, do I advise them that they need to check it off, or do I
Yes.
let them? Okay.
Yes, I would, because their client should not have signed this without that being marked, right? And if they say, well, go ahead and mark it, depending on what the situation is, I might have my client mark it and initial it, which means they still need to initial it. Right. And that's another part of this. Remember, 4 parts of the contract is it needs to be in writing on the proper form. We have to have all initials, all signatures, and then we have to communicate acceptance. And without those 4 parts, you do not have a contract. And there's some of you, I know there's a lot going on. I get it, but they're legal binding contracts. And when you're getting ready to close and you submit a file for review, you're closing tomorrow, for example, and you have the seller made changes in the initial, but the buyer didn't initial anything. What are you going to do when the buyer says, I didn't agree to that? I'm not closing. Right. So you don't have a legal ground there if they haven't initialed that change. And you can talk to some of the attorneys about it yourselves and get more on it. Here's another one where this form is not, it's not actually required even for us to provide. It's good to provide, but it's for FHA. And when you look at it right here at the top, it actually has FHA. And if you read through it, it says FHA. no place on this form does it require initials or signatures. And again, when you do stuff on your own, what's the purpose behind it? And I know you want proof that I provided it to them. But when you have it in, if you're using zip form and you send it over for signatures, depending on which platform you're using with it, you have the acknowledgement so they can acknowledge it and it's recorded, or it's also recorded in zip form that form went over with that package. They don't necessarily have to sign off or initial it. It was there. You presented it to them, right? We have a record of that. But it is only to be used. It's only to be used if it's FHA. That's all it's designed for. And it tells you that all the way through the form. If I'm wanting to tell the buyer to get their home inspected, which form would I use?
Inspection information.
Inspector information form. Thanks. Awesome. 2 superstars right there. Awesome. Good deal. Hey, oh, by the way, if your camera is not on, you do not get credit, right? That everybody's okay with that. And I know there's somebody who texted me this morning, said that they don't want credit. They have other things going on, but they wanted to listen to the class, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if your camera is not on, you do not get credit. So you don't want to mess with that. Here's another one for you. So I don't want to put an address on this because I want to use it for every property. I have no idea why we don't have an address on it. But that little bit of sarcasm was just yes, ma'am. The but on here we're supposed to have an address on every property, and that's again that comes from the legal side of things. If you go into an attorney's office, they have addresses at the top and at the bottom. Recently we updated our wills and everything, and you have to initial every page of this darn thing. Every page. I mean, it wasn't just that, it was all the other stuff that goes with those things. And every page has to be initialed, and there's a specific place. And then when we talk about the legal things, when you guys think, some of you probably think I'm crazy because I nitpick on some of this stuff. I put my initials HDM. And they said, no, you have to go back through, you have to have Junior on there. Right. On initials? Where'd that come from? Right? So that's where I get some of this from, just from dealing with attorneys on some of this stuff. Here's the non-realty items addendum. I love that last part on here. Home is fully furnished. With what? What's it look like? What do we have? And the highlighted part of this, the form even tells you description, model number, serial numbers. And again, that's another one. I know it's hard. In fact, I used to complain once in a while because, you know, you went to look at the property, and you went to look at it a second time to make sure you wanted it, and you still don't have the numbers. I mean, come on. If I'm going to go look at it a second time, I'm taking some pictures just for the heck of it, right? But if you're in it the first time and they really like it, might be a great opportunity to have that conversation about what's conveying and what's not. So we have that information, or make a second trip if you need to. But we need that. You're not going to get anything from a listing agent in most cases. They're going to tell you, if you're a new agent, you say, I need the model number or make or model of the refrigerator. They're going to say, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. They don't care, right? It's not their problem until something goes wrong, and then it will be. The refrigerator's not there in the kitchen that the buyer thought was going to be there. There'll be a problem. Here's another one.
Mac, I have seen in that one, in the NonRealty Items addendums, they put as seen on the pictures on the MLS. That might cover or not. I don't like also because, but I don't know. I have seen it in NonRealty Items addendum that when they send me something,
Right.
of course I'm the listing agent, so they will be in trouble, not actually me, but I have seen that they put those kind of stuff like, I don't know, refrigerator, stove, refrigerator, dishwasher, blah, 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 as seen on the pictures on the MLS.
Right. Yes. And so in addition to that, we also have, as seen on August the 14th, 2023. What did you see? what's there? And what you see and what I see might be two different things. And just like Gustavo said, he's a listing agent, so they send this over to him. What choice does he have? Well, part of the concern, my concern is, if they send that over and we accept it, the seller accepts it with that on there like that, everything in the unit, for example, the seller accepts that. And then the seller takes their stuff out, the buyer does the walkthrough and says, wait a minute, I thought I was going to get this. You go, no, that doesn't convey. Oh, but it said everything in the unit. Or home fully furnished. And now it wasn't a problem, but it's going to become a problem. And I've shared with you before, there's times that we've actually bought items, and that's not, you want to make sure that if possible, if at all possible, get the description, model number, serial numbers, etc. And yes, it is up to the buyer's agent. But again, take the high road, maybe educate them a little bit, that that's not the right way. It could be an issue.
Hey, Mac.
Yes, ma'am.
Last week, our buyer's offer was accepted, and it's an old house that they're buying. All the appliances are old, and we couldn't see any model numbers or serial numbers. We took pictures of the items that are staying, but when we sent the NonRealty, we couldn't put any serial numbers. I don't know what to do in this case.
Well, the good thing is, and you know, it's unfortunately, it's not a perfect world. Wish it was, but those things are going to happen. And Michelle, you guys are, in my opinion, a step ahead with it because you took pictures. At least you know what it looked like. You did the best you could with it. We're going to run across that. I mean, it's a part of it. But and in most of the cases, in all honesty, most of the cases, it's not going to be a problem. But there will be. I mean, we had last year, I think it was last year, there were two of them where it was over a refrigerator. There was one at South Padre Island where the seller took the refrigerator out of the kitchen and put the one from the garage in there. That was just last year. Those things happen.
Hey,
But
Matt.
if you and the fix on it is not it's not like a major item, but it can be. I mean, because buyers and sellers will nitpick until you just don't need that frustration. But
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Mac. I
Hey, Mac.
think on zip worms, can you hear me?
yes, Liza. Yes.
On zip worms, I think when you go to NonRealty and you get the NonRealty together, there's a little like a paper clip and you're able to attach pictures to the NonRealty.
Awesome. Good deal. Thanks.
Hey, Matt.
Yes, ma'am.
You know where it says the first one you showed said for $0?
Yes. Yeah.
No, I was told that's not for consideration. It's supposed to be a dollar amount
Right.
or no?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. Anytime we're dealing with money, it needs to be some kind of a dollar amount. But at the same time, and that form is a real it's caused issues across the board, because if I put a dollar amount on there, the lender, if there's financing, for us, for example, we had a lender that said, the underwriter said, reduce the loan amount by this amount, because those are non-realty items and it's not real estate, so we're going to reduce the loan amount. The local lender, loan officer, said, okay, do this, do an amendment and take that out. Well, to me, that's fraud, right? But you're trying to carry your clients and do what's right, and that's where we're at with it. The other aspect of that is, especially some from South Padre Island, I made some comments about a bill of sale. So on some of the, like the condos, they'll do a bill of sale instead of a non-realty items addendum. And in San Antonio, there was an agent that had to buy furniture because they did a bill of sale. She didn't write it up. They wrote it up, but they passed it through her from one to the other, right? From the buyer to the seller, and the seller signed off on it. It's all agreed to. These things are going to happen. Well, when the seller left, they took the furniture. So instead of going after the seller, they went after the agent, saying it was your responsibility to make sure those items stayed. And she actually ended up losing and having to pay for some of that. That's why I hit on the bill of sale. Even we should not have, if we're like the people at the island, for example, if they're doing a bill of sale, that between the parties, they can do whatever they want to. But as soon as you touch it, my understanding from a couple of the attorneys was that if you touch it, you're now involved in it. Maybe anyway, but it was just a part of it. All
So
right.
what, so
Yes.
do we put $1 or not on the non-realty? I mean,
Well,
how do we protect ourselves?
yes, I would highly recommend putting $1. I would put for us, probably the most recent ones, last few years was $5 or $10, something like that. On that one where they said take it out, I want to say we had like 4,000 or 5,000 on there. That's where the problem came from, was the amount of the money. But again, talk to the loan officer, see what they say about it, and make sure you're okay. And the other part of it is a part of the contract, so it's supposed to be there. So if you do an amendment, like they told us to do an amendment, take it out, all that paperwork, there's a paperwork trail there, and we just want to make sure that we have the right thing. So, but work with the lender on it. Know who your lender is so that it works for you. All right, I'm going to run through this. I've thrown the copy of this in the chat, so you guys have this or one like this. So we should be okay there. I'll throw another one in there for you. It's the same copy. You don't need to do it twice. But everyone, you see 1 to 4 family, right? So we're good there. On this, when I was going through this, I've redone this class so many times just for today, just because there's a lot of little things on here. Like, for example, the word attached. The word attached 9 times in the 1 to 4 family contract, it says to attach 9 times, or it has attached. The word attached 9 times. Refund the earnest money, for example, 11 times. And then the word shall. What does that mean? Shall. The buyer shall, the seller shall, right? And again, coming from the Trek Legal on this one, they said that that's actually means they will, right? When they agree to the contract, it says they will, if that's a part of it that pertains, they will do that. Not if they feel like it. So for us on shall, there's 39 times in the 1 to 4 family contract. And on this one, the one you have a copy of is not there, so you guys can highlight it if you want. But on this one, I highlighted some of those so we can see them. One of the areas when we talk about avoiding common mistakes is right here on D. We talk about improvements and accessories here on C, B, and C. And then D is exclusions. What are they going to exclude? That's improvements and accessories. So if, and that's why I used to hate that example instructors would give about the chandelier grandma gave you. I hated that. But if there's something that's attached and it's not going to be, they plan on taking it for whatever reason. So that example, even though I hated it, is a good one. If they're going to take it, that's an improvement or accessory that's going to fall in up here, right? And that's where our conversation needs to be. We need to make sure that we have that. If you're on the listing side, you should be having that conversation. And if the buyer walks through the house and says, I love this, just make a note of it. If they say, yes, that's the house they want, then we need to find out what's going on with it. Make sure we're good to go there. Not personal property. I think some of you may have seen a few of those I threw up that I had shown in previous classes where they had things like dresser drawers and exclude all personal items. It says will be retained by the seller, right? Personal items don't go there. Oil and gas, that popped up last week. Oil, gas, and minerals normally don't get involved in residential. It's normally on the, like in the rural areas. But if it is, there's an addendum there that needs to be attached. The only reason we would have that attached is if the seller owns those rights. If you read that addendum, if the seller owns oil, gas, or other mineral, water, whatever, right? Any other rights right there, if the seller owns those, then we'd attach that addendum. But if they don't, there's no reason to have it. And again, I think it's coming from a specific company. I haven't nailed that down completely, but lately that's been popping up. Where the buyer's agent sends it, says they have to have it. It's not required unless the seller owns those rights. And in most cases in residential, they don't. We've talked about the cash portion, the cash price. Remember, it's not contingent, does not include proceeds from borrowing of any kind or selling other property. Does not include that. Cash price, cash portion. Can we have two attachments? Yes. Finance attachments? Yes. We could have third party and seller financing. And especially with in a market where interest rates might be a little higher, you might have an individual who's doing conventional where it's an 80 loan to value is 80%. And then they do a seller carryback for maybe 10 or 15, and then they do 5 or 10 down, right? So in that case, you'd have two different attachments on here on the finance side. Residential leases, just to touch base on this. If you have a residential lease, if the property you're getting ready to write an offer on has a lease, that residential lease addendum is supposed to be attached. And it tells you everything that needs to be done. So there shouldn't be a problem with that. And a lot of times when I get calls and we start talking about, well, which form did you use? Or why is that a problem? Why is that a concern? Most of the time it comes back to we didn't use the right form or we didn't have the right form in our transaction. And we want to make sure that we have that. Again, this is one where I've said I'm a little worried about it because I see a lot of transactions where I think there might be a lease involved just by looking at it, but I don't see this being attached, and we need that. Then we also have fixture leases. Same thing, it needs to be attached. The addendum needs to be attached. Then you have the natural resources, and here's some of those shalls on here for you. Just as an example, if there is a fixture lease, solar panels, for example. I'm sorry, a natural resource lease. I'm sorry, a natural resource lease. Then the seller shall provide the buyer with a copy of that lease within 3 days, if they didn't already do that. If you're on the listing side, and you have this, upload that, put that, make that a part of your seller's disclosure on MLS. And then of course you have the days, and there's the word refunded again. Like I said, that refund is mentioned 11 times in the contract, 1 to 4 family contract. By the way, sticky notes are an option. That's what this one is, sticky note, right? That's an option in zip forms. You can actually even email that or send it. It won't print unless they tell it to. It won't print with the form, but it's one of the options you have in there. And I have it on here just as a reminder that option fee, to have an option period, we have to have a fee in there. It doesn't matter what the fee is, but there has to be a fee in there to have an option period. And then title company, we pretty well fix that. Earnest money, there's some still getting this mixed up, but it's not a major item. Additional earnest money, when we talk about backups, if you're going to do a backup contract, additional earnest money is a great way to go. Is earnest money required in the state of Texas? Earnest money? No. Thanks. Appreciate it. A few of you shaking your head. Appreciate that. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely not. Earnest money is not required in the state of Texas. It is considered good faith money. And as a listing agent, I would like for the seller to have some earnest money, but it's not required. So one of the things, if I'm doing a backup, is I might put 0 here for earnest money and a low option fee. Because is the option fee refundable in any circumstance? No. No. But we have to convey that with the consumer. We may know it, but we need to make sure the consumer knows it. So if I was doing a backup, I might have 0 earnest money and a low option, but a high additional earnest money here to go into effect on whatever days we negotiate with the backup. And that works really well because it lets the seller know that if we move in the first place, we're serious. Or if you convey it that way, it lets the listing agent know that we can do it that way, right? Termination option, remember it's 5 o'clock local time, wherever the property is located at, we need to have that conversation because sometimes they don't get it because they're not from here. 5 o'clock in California is a different time zone than us, right? And if you're 5:05 or 5:01 even, you've lost, right? We don't want to do that. So I want to focus on that. And there's a couple other little things I'll share with you on that here in a second. The failure to deliver the option fee, buyer shall not have the unrestricted right to terminate the contract under paragraph 5 is what it says in here in the contract, right? If there's no dollar amount stated, you don't have an option fee, but if you don't deliver it, you don't have an option period. What has been said on the legal side is that if it's delivered after the 3 days, they can still, and it's accepted. So if it's not there, I'm the listing agent, I'm gonna call the title company and say, hey, don't accept it. Anything if they bring it in, don't accept it, right? They've lost their option. I'm also going to communicate that with the other agent, but if they bring it in, what has been said on the legal side is that if they do bring it in, let's say it's day 4 or day 5 of a 10-day option period, they still have an option period, but it still started the day after the effective date, right? So if they have a 10-day option period and they bring it in on the 5 days and it's accepted, well, they have 5 more days left. And I wanted to touch base on that because sometimes you see agents saying, well, we were late getting it there, so our option period just started. And that's not, you can either go with no option or something like we just described. The title policy, when we talk about the shall again, and this is negotiable, we can do that either way. Either one of them can pay for it. Here's what I want to touch base on. That's the shortages in the area. We have this conversation about the shortages in the area from time to time. And when we, excuse me a second, grab this. Oops. We talk about the shortages in the area. This is, I pulled this from 2 title companies, Champions Title and Texas National Title is where I found this at. So when we talk about shortages in the area, you want, in my opinion, you want to mark yes. We're going to amend shortages in the area. Want to amend. So number 5 here, any encroachments of the improvements above or below the ground located, right? Any encroachments, or 4, any encroachments of the improvements on the insured land into an easement area. So that's what this is about. So this, if you clip that or I actually have it, I can share with you. It's actually in our group, Facebook groups, I believe. But that conversation comes up from time to time. Should I use that on the contract? And the answer is yes. We should mark 8.2 and then decide who's going to pay for it. And I've shared in the past, it's 5% of the title policy, whatever the title policy is. And if I was presenting that to the seller, I would say, you want to deliver everything nice and clean, pay the 5%. Right? That's just me. Any questions on that one? Then we also have the title commitment. On the title commitment, just as a reminder, if there is a problem, the buyer can object, right? And the seller can fix it. They have up to 15 days. Actually, they can be extended. The contract can be extended 15 days to fix it, or the buyer can terminate. But there's options in there is what I'm getting at. And so we should look at the title commitment, but they're supposed to look at it as well. Survey, there's 3 parts to this paragraph. We've talked about these. And one of the key things is we have to have a T47 if we're going to use an existing survey. And by the way, to do this, 6A8, right? To do this one, you have to have a survey. It can be an existing survey, does not have to be a new one, but you have to have a survey to make that work. Right. The on the survey, block 1, paragraph 1 is probably key, but there's 3 parts to it, and you have to follow all 3 parts. The first one is we're going to get the survey in the T47 when we got it. If we don't do that, on the listing side. If they don't provide it, then the buyer can order one, but not later than 3 days before closing. If you wait till the day before closing, right, that's not what the contract says. And then if the existing survey is not any good, then we decide who's going to pay for it. So there's 3 parts there, and that, again, that's a real common question we run across, because sometimes agents will say, well, I'm going to mark buyer's expense and the buyer can pay for a new survey. That's not the way that works. This is the buyer's right here, and this is the seller's, right? If you're going to get a new survey, this is only if the existing one doesn't work, right? Any questions on that one? We're good. There's the objections. I put days in here just as a reminder. That should be on the handout that I threw in the chat for you as well. We should have days in there so that we have the opportunity to object if there's any issues with anything. And survey is usually the last thing to come in there, so we want to make sure that we have everything covered. All right, any questions on anything we've covered so far? You'll also see I have a highlighted annexation, because that's a concern if based on use, if the buyer has a different use, if they're planning on doing something different, what's the where's the property located and what's it back to, or what's it located around, and is there any possibility, based on what you know, of them being annexed in? And that's Vicky Leggett, I think it was Vicky, had one years ago in North Harlingen, where it back to an area like the city limits, city zoning, and the people that owned it had horses. So if the buyer bought it and the city annexed it, then we would have issues. Public improvement. If it's in a public improvement, we're supposed to have a addendum attached to it if the property is in there. And fortunately for us, we don't have that many of those, although I think you're going to see more of those pop up around here. For those of you that are young and ambitious, you'll watch those in the future, right? And then down here, we also have required notices, and it says attached, and that's MUD, water conservation, and public improvement district. The we want to make sure that we have that. Somebody had in here termites or something, or we're destroying insects. That's not the kind of notice that we put in there. Access. I love this one when the seller says you're not going to be able to get back in the property. But the contract says, right, shall permit. Haven't seen that in a while, but occasionally they do that. Listing agents should take control of that situation so that we make sure we don't have any problems. And you do that by giving them a heads up and letting them know, right, of what's going on. Seller disclosure notice. Just keep in mind that if you mark to, and as a listing agent, I hated this, so I always tried to make sure that the seller's disclosure notice was uploaded. If we had one, if it's a repo, we didn't have one, right? But if there's a seller's disclosure notice, get it uploaded so that when you fill out the contract, when you fill out the offer for the buyer, we have the seller's disclosure notice, because otherwise you're giving the buyer a 7-day out or more. Because here, if they get it within 5 days, the buyer gets that within 5 days, right? Let's say they get it on day 5. You now 5 days into this, now they have 7 days where they can terminate. Now, if they don't get it at all, they can terminate prior to closing. And when we say don't get it, if the seller's disclosure notice says something's supposed to be attached to it and it's not attached, did they get it? And food for thought is they probably didn't get a completed seller's disclosure notice. So again, that's one of those that will end up in litigation somewhere. We have that case study up in Dallas where the Mavericks basketball player terminated right before closing, wanting his money back, $10,000 earnest money, and the seller said no. So that is why I touch base on it. As is means as is, right? Today, how do you see it today? What do we see? That's the way the property is going. That's the way we're going to convey it in its present condition. We can still do inspections, we can still negotiate repairs. It says that right in the contract. I don't need to write as is, and that's why sometimes when I cover some of this stuff, it's for the benefit so that we can explain it to the consumer. Because some of us have had sellers that said, I'm selling the property as is, I'm not gonna do anything. Okay, that's fine. When you get the offer and they're asking for closing costs, or they do an inspection and they're asking for repairs, and the seller says, I told you I'm not doing any repairs. You would not be having that conversation if you had talked about this paragraph. Maybe you wouldn't be having that conversation. Sometimes they're hard-headed, right? But they can always say what? They can always say no. It's not a big deal. Buyers coming in and wanting something fixed. It may be something minor. We don't know that. So please don't make a blanket statement that we're not going to do any repairs. Let's take a look. Let them do inspections. Take a look at that. And if you refuse, that's fine. Are they required? Is the seller required to make repairs? Nope. Absolutely not. And even on lender required repairs, buyer or seller can do those repairs. I wouldn't recommend the buyer doing it, but they can. And the buyer can get out even if the seller wants to do the repairs based on how much the repair is going to cost. Then we also have the paragraph about completing repairs. That's in here. And I highlighted an area in there where some changes are made. This ties in with our amendment now. So the amendment refers back to this. You don't need to write anything extra. You don't need to do it. Show the scope of the work. It's going to be done at seller's expense, right? They're going to transfer their warranties, all that. So everything's right there for us. We don't need to write that in. And on the amendment, it actually says, references back to paragraph 7F, which is this paragraph. So all we need to do is call people's attention to it, and we should be good to go in most cases. Residential service contract, buyer buys, seller reimburses them. We've got that. That's highlighted on there for you. The this part about the broker, there's 3 parts to it. That's the reason I have the break between the oars. If you are a real estate agent and you're involved in the transaction, make sure you understand those 3 parts. One of those 3 parts probably apply if you're involved in one way, other than representing the clients. Closing on or before, and it says 7 days after objections are made in paragraph 6D. So the closing date is automatically extended if there's objections, right? We've already talked about that. It's automatically extended, but they need to be cured, or the buyer can waive it, right? If they want to. If you fail to close by the closing date, the non-defaulting party may exercise remedies in paragraph 15. 15 and 18, 2 of the most common paragraphs. We don't read it, we don't interpret it, but please take, when there's a problem, please take a look at paragraph 15 and 18 of the contract I gave you, and then we'll talk about it. I'll be over there to talk about it. And closing and funding. What's closing and funding in a nutshell? Anybody?
When the
Closing
money's
funding.
released to title,
Say again?
when the money's released to title.
The money's released to title.
And it's recorded.
Yeah, who was that? Who was that?
Gabino.
Cabino. Yes, it has to be recorded. So, and the money aspect of it is important, but we've also seen situations where the money was transferred. Actually, I'm sorry, the money wasn't transferred, and it took 3 days to get it transferred. The buyers and sellers had signed. It took 3 days to get it transferred over, to get it dispersed. And the title company's not going to record it until all that can be done, right? And until it's recorded, it's still in the previous owner's name, which has a lot of little things attached to it. So if you buy my property, we sign and everything today, but we haven't funded, I'm still the legal owner of the property. However, since you are buying it, I probably canceled my insurance. So, for today. So there's a possible problem there, and your insurance is in place to cover that, but you're not the owner, and you have homeowners insurance. Does that make sense? And that's where all these little problems come from. Gabino, do you have something, sir?
Yeah, I have a quick question on that. So what if at the closing table, like when we're closing, the seller has expressed that they need to remove something from the property. For example, they have something in the storage shed, but they can't access it or they can't go get it till maybe like 3 days after closing and funding. What do we use to get the parties to agree? Because the buyer will allow them to get that personal property out of there. But is there a document we can use for that at closing?
There's really not. And that's something, that's why we want to do our walkthroughs and all this other stuff and have those conversations. I mean, it's not a perfect world. And we've all probably seen that situation. But it's scary. Because what if the buyer says yes and then changes their mind, which has happened? Or what if the buyer says yes, then when the previous owner shows up to get their stuff, they say things are missing. Right? Those are
Heck, how about a lease back option? That,
right. But the lease back gives them, it might be an option, but the lease back gives them an option for the property, not just, some stuff in a shed or something of that nature.
I had a question about closing and funding. When the title company tells you they have authorization to release funds, is that pretty much funding?
I would ask them what they mean by that. I know, like I used to work with Stewart Title a lot, and they would call and say it's funded and recorded is the call I would get. It's funded and recorded. So that and recorded part is the part that I'm looking for. And today recording is so easy. They do it all electronically in most cases. So not like we used to have to run down to the courthouse and stuff. All right. On the settlement, I don't have a set answer for that. It would be very risky any way you go. But there's not a document for it that I'm aware of at all. Anytime you have a question and we can't come up with an answer, one of the things we can do is call the Texas Realtors hotline. You can call them or email them and probably get an answer, especially if that's a real life situation. They don't usually do what ifs, but they'll tell you what the contract says in most cases, so they may not be able to answer that specifically either, because there's not, like I said, to my knowledge, there's not a form for it. Prorations, we talk about those. We want to make sure we have that. Casualty, remember that the owner is responsible for getting the property back up. If they cannot do it, the buyer can go ahead and accept it and accept the insurance if the insurance carrier allows that. And that's a big part of that. If default, there's paragraph 15. If the buyer fails or if the seller fails, here's what goes on. And I don't want to interpret this. I do not want to interpret this for them. I want them to read it. That's best practice, in my opinion, is to let them read it so they can figure out what's going on. And then again, even on 18, 15 and 18, I've mentioned it several times. That's as they call you and say, I want to terminate my contract. Buyer calls, says, I want to terminate the contract. You talk to them about why. But please take a look at 15 and 18. If they're not in that window where they need to be, or there's not a legitimate reason for it, they could be up a creek, right? And then the other one we run across, and I have highlighted on there as well, is the demand. And some title companies do not allow this, do not follow this, but in the contract it says exactly how that's supposed to work. If one party refuses to sign a release of earnest money, here's what they're supposed to do. That's in demand. That one's a really good one to know, because there are title companies that do use it, but there's also some that don't. On D for the damages, if they refuse, and this is another reason why I say 15 and 18, if you refuse to sign that release, Mr. Seller, take a look at 18D. Right, so all you're trying to do is draw some attention to it. Let them make the decisions. We don't make the decisions for them. They make that decision. All right, federal taxes, we've all talked about this. If you're not familiar with it, read paragraph 20. The buyer shall withhold. The buyer is responsible. The buyer is responsible for making sure this happens. And if you're representing the buyer, you could have some responsibility in it as well, as what Texas Realtors has said. If you're a listing agent and it doesn't happen, you could end up with a responsibility. On here, notices, any notice is supposed to go to the buyer or the seller at this email address or phone number. I don't understand why people would put an address in here. Why would you want a notice mailed to your client? Why would you want that? I mean, you have 5 days to react and you're going to mail them the notice? That's probably not a good thing, right? So, and down here on the bottom, it says with a copy to the seller's agent. Some of you, and I apologize for this, but I watched the Trek recording that said that was what they were talking about, was that's primarily for transaction coordinators and assistants. But I was talking to a couple other instructors, and one of the concerns, something I hadn't thought about personally, is we have transaction coordinators and assistants that are virtual, no real estate license. And which means they can't handle contracts. Right? So I have no idea, not legally handle contracts. So I took that off there. You want to put your information in there, put it in there. They should pull it from paragraph 10, but again, based on the conversation Trek had at the time, they were going to delete it completely and put a notice on there, not agents do not put your information in here. Was one of the conversations, and then they decided, well, we need to have it going to their team or whatever, right? So that's why they put it on there. Attorneys, do they have one? We've already talked about that one, so we don't need that anymore. And this one right here, last agent to communicate acceptance. The last agent to communicate acceptance, that's who puts the effective date in there. If it goes back 3 or 4 times, it's going to be the last person to communicate that. Is everybody good? This last page, everybody has this nailed, right? We know that if it's intermediary, it's all on the right-hand side. Hello. It's intermediary, it's all on the right-hand side. Not on the left-hand side. You're all from the same office, it's on the right-hand side. Is there anybody that does not understand that? Raise your hand, yell at me. Okay. I don't see that often, maybe about once a month or so, but that's, if you're in the same office, everybody's information should be on the right-hand side. We'll leave it there. Other broker. This is for the other broker, pay the other broker. So if it's intermediary, do we put a percentage in here? No. Well, how do you get it to the title company? Send them an email, make a phone call. It's for the other broker. That's what it's designed for. And again, it just comes back to this simple understanding. So we shouldn't have any problems. Anybody have any questions on this one? All right. Cool. So you guys need a break, or are we okay? Want to take 5? Take 5? I wasn't going to. Let's take 5 right quick. Grab some coffee, because I know it's exciting, right?
Mac,
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I mean, I didn't want to interrupt the class, and I don't know if even related, but with what happened right now, you know, I mean, last week or this weekend, with the home exploding, and I don't know, it was a new construction or it was a real estate contract involved, you know, that, you know, the purchase. I just want to know if there's like the broker, or if in you know, it did happen that there was you know, a contract involved. How much are we responsible for it if something like that happened? Do you know? Did you see the news about this home exploding because in a neighborhood, because it was something on the something, it was on top of a mine or some, I don't know. So I just want to know if could be related that to us as a real estate agents or not really.
There's only so much we can do. Knowledge wise, we're supposed to have knowledge of the area. That's why they talk about geographic competency, but I don't think I've seen the news release that you're talking about. But
Okay.
If it's something where the house is setting on something, that's not our, how's the seller gonna know? If the seller doesn't know,
Okay.
right? So I don't see us, personally, I don't see us having any liability there, but I've been wrong before. So,
Okay, no, because it looks like it's nothing like it was just one home in like this humongous land, you know, it was really like a subdivision. I mean, homes next to each other. And I mean, it was a big thing, terrible. And I was like, oh my, I was just wondering about if there was like a contract involved that they should be liable or not. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Now, if there's, we're gonna talk about the seller's disclosure when we come back. But if there's a propane service area, right? If there's a propane service area, then that there's an addendum for that. And those are usually propane tanks outside a subdivision. You see them up in the Austin area all the time. You have a subdivision and right outside of it is this great big, maybe 5 tanks or more with all the.
Yes.
Now
Yeah, no, I think
that requires a notice. That one has an addendum for that, just because of
Mhm.
what you're talking about. If something goes wrong, that whole area could blow up, right?
Yeah, I know. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your input.
So,
Okay, bye.
all right, if we get everybody back in here, please, we'll get this going. Get it going. Everybody should see the seller's disclosure notice. Yes, that's what we're looking at. All right. This is the new seller's disclosure notice. Like I said, it's in zip forms already. So you can use that from there. There should not be any problems. The change that it had on here is right here where it says fuel gas piping. Black iron pipe, what kind of pipe is being used? That's the change. You'll know that it's the new one because on the bottom left-hand corner, it'll say 71023. That's how you know you have the new one. And then of course on Trex, it's going to be in the upper right-hand corner if they're using that one, or what Gustavo called the shorter one. So either one of those two corners will give you the date for that. On here, I also touch base on just a couple other items on here. If it says attached, remember that's what we were talking about. If there's a septic or sewer, we're supposed to attach the information about that. 1407, that's a requirement. And then we also have any previous, if there's any previous items, foundation, wood destroying insects, roof repairs, any of that, we're supposed to have comments down here in this section or attach a sheet to it, right? And then once again, we always, on the listing side, we always want a copy of the buyer's signed seller's disclosure notice, no matter which one we use. Some of you are using Seller's Shield, which is absolutely great, more so in Corpus Christi than anywhere else, which is good. Absolutely love that. When we talk about Seller's Shield, for those of you that have not messed with that, let me back this up here. Right here where it says disclosures, on the screen, you still see the screen okay, right? Right here where it says disclosures, if you click on that, that opens up Seller's Shield. It doesn't cost anything to use it. It kicks it, you can kick it over to the seller. They fill out the information. It gives them the opportunity to purchase insurance if they want, but they don't have to. That way we make sure all the boxes get done. That's the easiest way, in my opinion, to get it done and make sure it's done accurately. It gets recorded that way rather than trying to do it this way, but this way works too. All right, that's on the seller's disclosure. And let's talk about this. I mean, so there's a few exemptions to the seller's disclosure. We get that once in a while. Oh, well, my seller doesn't want to fill one out. Well, again, not being an attorney, I can't tell you exactly, but things I've read says that could fall underneath deceptive trade practices if the buyer finds something wrong with the property the seller didn't tell them about. So that's why we also want to make sure we are using the new one in case there's ever an issue there. We have the correct form besides putting that out. But here are the exemptions from the seller's disclosure or for the seller's disclosure. And again, I believe that's in our Facebook group as well. So you have access to it there. If you want to work with that. Speaking of that, real quick, if I could, here's a task list. You know, Alex is really good about stuff like this. Here's a task list. This is on the seller side. If I listing side, so I can go into zip form and set this all up so that these forms become due like 21 days after I hit start. 21 days after it's created, in other words, or 7 days after, whatever you have on there. So this is just a rough one. This is on the listing side. And then there's this one, which is on the buyer side as well. This is to help set up tasks within zip forms. So zip forms will remind you this needs to be done, that needs to be done using the system in part for what it's for. All right, just throw this out. All right, the next one I want to touch base on, I'm going to touch base on several contract addendums forms. So you can just jot down some notes on it. That'd probably be the easiest way. This one is the lead-based paint addendum. Most of us are familiar with it. Most of us are familiar with it. And once again, we make sure we have the address at the top. We make sure that we check only one box. The form even tells you this, tells you what needs to be done. And this is the buyer's rights and the buyer's acknowledgement. This one says check boxes that apply. Right here says they've received copies of the information above. Well, if the seller didn't give them any information, how can we check that box? Right? And then this one says they've received the pamphlet. So sometimes some of you on the pamphlet, protect your family from lead, all that, whatever. On that pamphlet, some of you will have the consumer initial it. So did I back in the day. However, this says the buyer has received that pamphlet. So we don't need to do that. As long as we make sure they get the pamphlet, they check this, and they sign down below like they're supposed to. Right? And they sign it, and some of you see me kick this back where I'll say the other broker needs to sign it. Well, I was working with the buyer. I was working for the seller and with the buyer. Okay, did you give the buyer the information? Yes. Then you need to sign it. So even if the buyer's a customer, we're not giving them advice and opinions. Even if the buyer is a customer, we need to sign down here at the bottom. We're verifying, and that's what this is. It's accuracy. We're verifying that the information above took place, right? We provided the buyer with the pamphlet. We've done all this, even if the buyer is a customer. Everybody good there? On that one? All right. So let me jump into this one then. Yes, there's two seller's disclosure. I mean, two lead-based paint addendums. There's one for regular homes and there's one for leases. I love what I do. You guys are awesome. Absolutely awesome. Open up a cell. We have a 1 to 4 family contract, and we'll have this. Did you read the form? I don't know. It says residential lease on it right there. Just makes you want to ask. But anyway, it's the same thing. Tenant's acknowledgement. They've received copies or they got the pamphlet, right? And we're doing the same thing down at the bottom. And remember the dates. The seller signs first because the seller saying I'm providing this information. It's a notice, right? Or I'm sorry, a disclosure. The seller signs first, and then the listing agent, and then the buyer, and then the buyer's agent saying the buyer received all this information. Everything's accurate. We're good to go. That's what you're doing with this. So both of them work, and both of them need to be used for their appropriate transaction. If you have anything, you can just unmute, jump in, yell at me. Otherwise, I will keep going. Addendum regarding residential leases. This is the one that should be attached to the 1 to 4 family. And remember, attached means we mark that little box on the back. This is the one that should be attached to the 1 to 4 family if there's a lease on the property that's being bought or sold, right? We need to make sure this is there. And then this was a question that came up last week. This notice, this paragraph will not amend or terminate the existing lease. If there's a concern there, somebody needs to talk to an attorney, right? Once the leases are in place, that's a pretty important part. Even with the repos, somebody I talked to last week, even with the repos, we weren't allowed to just kick people out of the properties. If they had a valid lease, we had to honor it or give them money to get them out, right? And what I did find, though, most of them didn't have a valid lease. Most of them had a verbal. And for the state of Texas, it should be in writing, generally speaking. All right, then you have the delivery. So they delivered a copy of the leases. That's what this is talking about. And then we also, if they haven't received it, they will get it. And if not, they can terminate. If there is the oral residential lease, we're notifying the buyer of that here, right here on this paragraph. The seller shall transfer to security deposits. And this is what I was talking about earlier. If we're using the forms, everything's covered here. So if the buyer is buying or the seller is selling a duplex, for example, even if they're living in one and renting out the other one, there's a security deposit. The seller's not allowed to keep that. He gets transferred to the new buyer. And in fact, the buyer has to give a signed statement to the tenant, according to this form, right? And if the seller, if anything changes, the seller is supposed to let the buyer know about that. Any questions on that one? So think,
Mac, I do.
yes, ma'am.
So back onto the residential lease, the buyer's supposed to notify the tenant of a statement. So that means just a new lease with the new parties on it. Is that what that means?
No, it doesn't necessarily.
Or just a statement acknowledging that they are
That they
residing
receive.
as tenants?
Yeah, it's about the deposit. That's
Oh,
what,
okay,
that's what it's about. They want to let the tenant know that they've received that deposit.
okay.
So we attach the estoppel certificate? Or the addendum? The residential tenant estoppel certificate
For what? Is that
for
what it
this,
says?
isn't that,
So what, if we're selling a property that has a tenant in it, what we're supposed to do is have this, it's 1 to 4, right? If you're doing commercial, that's a whole different ballgame. But the 1 to 4 family on this one, then what we do is we attach this addendum to the 1 to 4, right? And then it says the buyer has received a copy of all leases. So if I'm representing the buyer and the buyer's received copies of all these leases, it's a fourplex, for example, then I have 4 leases that I should have copies of. I have this addendum and 4 leases. If it was a fourplex, all of those are going to be in my file in case something ever comes up. So I mark the fact that they've got this, and then here is where it says the buyer shall deliver to the tenant a signed statement. It could be, there's not a form for it, there's not a specific form for it, acknowledging that the buyer has acquired the property and is responsible for returning the deposit. And then specifying the dollar amount, and that's the key, because sometimes issues that we've had in the past, whatever the deposit is, the previous owner didn't put it in a trust account, they just put it in their account. And I had one of those here in Harlingen. It was a duplex over by New Hampshire. It was a duplex. And when I talked to her about the deposit being transferred to the new owner, she goes, "What deposit?" I go, "The deposit you collected when they rented the property. That should have been put in a trust account or a separate account." She goes, I spent that money. Not the way property management is supposed to work, right? And we'll run across that once in a while, but when you just follow this, so this addendum should be there, and then we should also have copies of all the leases. And then this can be any kind of a statement, Terry. I wouldn't type anything up. I would have them write out a statement that they've received it. We don't necessarily have a form for that.
Okay, thank you. I just know I'm gonna get asked that question here soon, so,
Yes, yeah. Yeah, you're still working on that one, right?
yes.
All right, the other one we had was the flood notice. And this is the one that occasionally some of you will get this back, where if you do a lease, it's 2015 is the number. If you do a lease, you have to have this attached, period. It doesn't say if the buyer wants to, or the seller wants to, or the agent wants to. It says, and that I go back to that form description and reference that we talked about earlier. That's where that information's at. It's designed to be attached to all leases. That's part of our problem, and one of the things we're trying to get situated with the legislative side, because it said all leases, attach it to all leases, but the seller's temporary residential lease, whoops, that's not the one I want. On the seller's temporary residential lease or the buyer's residential lease, paragraph 23 is the one that says that they have received it. Well, why is a buyer going to give the seller a flood notice? That's been our argument. The owner's been living there for X amount of years. This person hasn't lived there. But legislative side of it just said all leases, period. And that's why both of those forms are set up so that notice is attached to them. Any lease, 2015 needs to be attached. Everybody good? And then speaking of leases, some of you are doing a lot of leasing. There's this form, and it's agreement between brokers for residential leases. We talk a lot about the broker to broker agreement or broker to owner agreement. And I want to bring this one in here so that you guys can see that it is here. It's agreement between brokers for residential leases. And one of the things on here, just like the broker owner, it talks about fees and everything. But then down here at the bottom, it also mentions the fact that we need to have a W-9 with that. Which is exactly what Cody and Evan, that's what they look for. They have a file. If we've done transactions with them before, that may already be on file. But if not, we need that. And this agreement would point that out. Everybody good? And here's this one where we have the invitation to the buyer. I don't see this being used very often. And I've shared in the past, I didn't understand during COVID why it wouldn't be. But it's the seller's invitation to the buyer to submit a new offer. And it doesn't make the offer a counter, and it tells you that this is not a counter offer, right? It's an invitation for a better offer, something we might consider a little better. This form is designed for the seller to say, if you did this, I would look at your offer a little better. That's it. And it helps on the buyer side because now we have specifics on what they're looking for. I will tell you from practice though, if you're the listing agent and you use this, when you get that offer back, the buyer's agent says, okay, we made the changes your seller wanted. Look at the whole offer. Look at the whole offer, because occasionally they'll make those changes and some others. And if you only look at the ones you asked for, there may be other changes in there where you didn't agree to it. Like the seller didn't agree to pay closing costs. They didn't agree to do this, right? Please look at those. Those are real conversations. And then there's this one, the notice of withdrawal of an offer. Again, I don't know if anybody's using it. I haven't seen it in a while, but this works on both sides. So if I write up an offer and I send it over to you, and I'm talking to the buyer and they go, you know what, we've changed our mind. We don't want to do that. I can text you, call you, email you, but I can also send this form. And when I talk about text, call, or email, here's the information. We're withdrawing all previous, or the buyer withdraws all previous submitted offers. Whichever way you want to do it. I use the text, call, email, and then the form would be great. So you have it documented. Can the seller withdraw their counter offer? Yes. And that's where this form comes into play. So when can they do that? Anytime before it becomes a contract. So remember, we have to have it in writing on the forms, initials, signatures, and communicated acceptance. If I send Alex an offer today, and at 8 o'clock tonight, my buyers say, hey, we've changed our mind, we want to do something else. I just notify them that we're withdrawing. We're not terminating because we don't have a contract. We're withdrawing our offer. However, if I send Alex that offer and he calls me back an hour later saying, Mac, we're on contract. Now we're terminating because we have a contract. That means his sellers initialed and signed and there was no changes made. Does that make sense? If his sellers make one change, then it has to come back to us. It has to come back to us for the buyer's initials on those changes. Once I have that, Alex, we have a contract. Now we're going to get it to the title company, all that. It does not go to the title company until you have a contract. I know some of you have been dealing with that because there's a company in McAllen area that as soon as they send you an offer, they want to send it to the title company. Don't understand what that is, but it's out there. You guys know. All right. Any other questions on any of those?
Mac, on the withdrawal, I just did one. My buyer withdrew the offer, gave it to the seller's agent. The seller's agent doesn't have to sign it, right? Or the seller?
No, it's a notice. It goes from one party to the other. No, it's not required to be signed. It's a
Okay.
notice. So I can mark buyer, the buyer signs it. That's all we need to do. It's not an agreement. It's just a notice. Right. Well, we couldn't even get him to sign the contract, so, you know. And that's the other thing. If you submit something and it's 2 or 3 days and you have not received anything, there's a whole lot of other things that go with this, but withdrawing that offer might be a good move for the buyer unless they absolutely want that. Because if there's problems now, there's probably going to be problems later in communicating. And what was that I heard the other day? Somebody told me they had talked to the listing agent. Listing agent said, I can't help it. I'm busy right now. Excuse me. That's not going to last a long time. It's busy will dry up if your customer service is horrible. Would you agree? Yes. All right. The just a couple little notes here on these. If you're not familiar with them, you can follow this. The addendum, and again, these are not. I don't have these set up as a handout, but they are in your system. The addendum for sale of other property. If the buyer has another property they're selling to buy this property, this form is designed to be used. Remember, on the 1 to 4 family, that doesn't count as cash because they don't have it, right? So on here, this would go with the offer. I want to send this over with the offer, and I want to make sure that we have it all documented the way we're supposed to. So this right here, and in fact, if you put the cursor over the form blank, it'll tell you what goes there, right? So from the sale of the buyer's property on or before this date. So what date do you want to put in there? This contract is contingent for the buyer to sell their property on or before this date. So that's the date that the buyer expects to have been done with their other property. Expiration of the contingency. So if I put, if the buyer has their home listed, but it's not on contract, and well, I'm going to be honest about it, I might put 60 days in here. If it's on contract and due to close in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'm probably going to put that date, maybe a couple more to add to that, right? So we can work with that. The some of the other items that are on here, if the contingency is not waived or satisfied, it's going to terminate, right? If the seller accepts a written contingency, and this is why, and I've shared this in the past, this is one of the reasons why some agents don't use this. And be frank about it, I don't see where you have that choice. It's designed to be used for this purpose. If you use the system, it works. Other way, it can get real messy. If the seller accepts an offer, if they get another offer, they can actually tell the buyer, you need to perform. You need to buy the property or all bets are off, right? And so we're going to put the days on here. How many days? Buyer must waive the contingency on or before how many days after the seller gives them that notice. So when the seller gives you that notice, how many days do you want before you actually do something? And if you're going to waive that notice, if you're going to waive the contingency, you have to put some money down. That's why I was talking about the additional earnest money and all that stuff. This backup works as well, right? This sale of other property. If the buyer waives the contingency and they can't close solely due to the buyer's non-receipt of the proceeds, right? Buyer's going to be in default. If they waive the contingency, they will be in default. So don't waive it unless you're certain you're going to close. Now, this is the addendum for sale of other property. And then we also have the notice that the seller is going to give them to say that they have another offer and it's time for you to do something. And on this one, the buyer may waive the contingency and deposit the earnest money, the extra earnest money. And once again, this is, the first one goes with the offer. This is, we're in contract, selling the other property, we're in contract buying this one. And this one is there for the seller if they get something else and they want out of it. Or they want to give the buyer the option to move forward. Here's what we have. Right? And this is the buyer's response. So when you're looking at the buyer's response, the buyer waives or does not waive. And if they do not waive it, the contract is terminated and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. So easy to work with. So let's do this one real quick. Buyer's backup. How many of you have been doing backup contracts? Some of you, I think I've seen one or two backup contracts, no? Holy smokes. So let's talk about that just for a second. Then if a buyer really loves a property, if they really love a property, doing a backup is good for them, right? And I get it. You have to get through the gates of the listing agent, because sometimes I've even told agents that, you know, a buyer's really interested in the property, they'd like to see it. Oh no, the seller doesn't want anybody to see it, it's on contract. Well, the 1 to 4 family contract says you can still show it unless you have something in writing that tells you otherwise. And if we show it and the buyer likes it, we can do a backup. You can only have one backup on a contract. As a listing agent, I want a backup because now that gives the power to the seller. If this buyer starts demanding a lot of things, we can say, you know what, we're done. We're not going to do it. Either take it like it is or we're out of here. Right. And then you take the backup. So it can work both ways. And I absolutely love it. On this one, the date that we need in here is the effective date of the first contract. So you're going to need to get that from the listing agent. The effective date of the first contract. The first contract does not terminate on or before. This date is negotiable. It's whatever the buyer wants. Let's say the property they fell in love with just went under contract and they have a 10-day option period. That date could be 10 days out. What if they love that property and if it falls apart at all, they want in? So in that case, that date might be, what's the closing date? What's the expected closing date? And for those of you that are listening to that, if that first contract gets extended, right? If it gets extended, it's okay. It doesn't terminate it. They can do that. But we need to extend ours as well. If the buyer really wants it, we want to extend this date. If the buyer really wants it. Because if they're extending, that's a sign there might be a problem. So why back out now? That's just my take on it. And you'll have 2 effective dates. You have 2 effective dates. You have the one because you're under contract. So you do the backup addendum. You're under contract. You follow the contract. So we need option money and earnest money. And that's why I was talking about earnest money would be 0. Option small for the backup. Works really well. Once we move into first place, we follow the contract. So you have 2 option periods. You have if, notice the word if right here. If we, on D, if the buyer has the unrestricted right. So on the 1 to 4 family contract, if we have an option period, we have an option period from the time we go under contract. And then when we get the amended effective date, we start the one that we have in the contract. So you have 2 option periods basically, but you're only going to pay for one. But paying that one gives you that option. So the buyer on a backup, a buyer can go look at other properties. And if they find something they like, they can terminate this one. Not a problem. What are they going to lose? If they follow what I gave you, they'll lose their option fee and that's it. Everybody good? Any questions there? No.
What would be a good option fee amount? You say low, like $25, $50, $1?
Yeah, we've certainly done that zero option and I think we did one with 10. But it can be whatever's negotiable between the thing is, the reason why I'm trying to explain it to you guys this way is because you guys are gonna have to explain it to the other agent, because I absolutely guarantee you they don't know. Right? And that's and I could be wrong, but most of them don't know. There's a question in the chat. Ruby has a question in the chat about the earnest money, and yes, earnest money in the state of Texas is not required. However, if you have earnest money in the contract, then you need to make sure it gets deposited, right? And that's why I say on a backup, put 0 because it's not required, and then put the option fee. That way, the only thing the buyer loses if we terminate is the option fee. And remember, on there, I also said, if we're going to use a backup, then we want to put the days on the 1 to 4, the days, and do additional earnest money. And that'll show the seller that we are serious about it, even though we don't have anything up here. Does that make sense? Some of you are like, no, it's okay. It's all right. We're okay. All right, buyer's temporary residential lease. I just want to show you this one. And this is what I was talking about. Most of us have worked through this, know what this is. But right here's what I was talking about. Paragraph 23, landlord's floodplain. Landlord has delivered to the tenant. So this is on the buyers and it's on the sellers as well. Buyers and sellers as well. And so when they sign this, they're saying that they have delivered it and that they've received it. And if you have not done that, in other words, if I'm looking at your file and I see you have a temporary residential lease and I can't find that notice in there, I'm going to assume that it wasn't done, right? And I know there's still some of you, a couple holdouts with dot loop, so you're doing things over there and then transferring them over. But if it's not in the file, then I'll send you a notice saying, hey, you have to have this. And there's a few that are like that, not many. Any other questions or comments there? Cool. All right, I want to do one last thing here real quick. I can do it on this one as well. So earlier, somebody had mentioned something about a paper clip. And that paper clip is right here in the center. And when I click on that, it opens up. All I need to do is I can plug in what paragraph it is. Paragraph title, so it could be parties, right? It could be property, it could be whatever I wanted it to be. Paragraph 2, for example. And then you could put the legal description or whatever it is you add. And you can click on save. And that becomes a part of that document. Now you don't see it here, but if I go over here to print or to send, it will be there. It'll be one of the last parts of that. And some of you are using it because I see these where we're using it. So when I scroll down, it's right there. It's this one, right, where it says it adds the addendum. So clicking on the paperclip allows you to do that. The only thing I would ask you to do is it's set up with a signature. So you're going to need to do a signature. And if I'm doing a signature on the addendum, where I've added information that wouldn't fit into the contract, I probably should sign this up here as well. Because I seen one of those the other day. They signed the addendum, but they didn't sign the form. Right? So let's try to make sure we cover all those. What's this? That one. All right. Any questions about anything we've covered? Nope. Not hearing anything. Just for. Trying to show you something. I'm gonna show you. That didn't go well. All right, well, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna stop share. That's what we're gonna do. But I was trying to share with you, how many of you are familiar with, and again, I'm not promoting anything. Other remix, I don't do that. The how many of you are familiar with Fairway Mortgage? Fairway Mortgage, yes. Okay. So anyway, they have Fairway Mortgage has a thing, I think it's in October. That's what I was try to show you. That went out in an email. Everybody should have gotten a copy of it. If not, I can post it later on if we need to. But Fairway Mortgage is having a boot camp. It's going to be in Harlingen. It's going to be at the convention center in Harlingen, or whatever that's called over there. The nothing like the one they have in McAllen, by the way. Just we blew that. We had our opportunity, but no. Anyway, they're having it's called boot camp. It's about working with veterans. It's 4-hour CE credit, and Fairway Mortgage is doing it. They've had those before. I've seen them in San Antonio and other places, but I've never seen one in the Valley. So when I seen that this morning in the morning email, I grabbed it and I wanted to make sure that you guys knew about it, because it should be pretty good. And you end up as one of the, if I remember correctly, I've not talked to Minerva about it, but if I remember correctly, you end up as one of their agents for VA loans and et cetera, which is a pretty good deal. But it teaches you how to work with VA loans, which is interesting sometimes, because there's a lot of agents that don't understand how those work. Like for example, and it may be true with other things, but with the VA, there's a whole lot of ways they can do things. But if the seller contributes to the veteran's closing cost, that's one aspect, but they can also ask the seller to pay down their points, and the points don't count as the closing cost. Right? Points means we're reducing the interest rate, which is an option. Right? And the last thing on that, how many of you are familiar with VIND loans? Anybody? VIND loans? No? Yes, I had somebody, Corpus Christi said yes. Awesome. I wonder. The a VIND loan is where it's a VA foreclosure and it's open to anybody. And the financing on it is available. It's all kinds. There's no mortgage insurance. There's nothing else. And there's some of those properties available in our service area, like Corpus Christi and down. If you have any questions about it, let me know and I can get you the information on it. But I share that in some of the MRP classes and GRI classes. Anybody have anything else for us? So everybody that wanted credit should still be on here. And we should